Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the Data Legends podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Pilata, and this week we have a surprise, a bonus episode. We enjoyed our conversation with Wes Gelpi so much that we wanted to give you more, and we had additional interesting perspective to share. Right now, you're listening to part one, but once you've finished listening to this episode, and if you enjoyed it, we'd love for you to check out our bonus episode where we dive a little bit deeper into the importance of a data lake, how you activate a data lake, how organizations deal with a data lake, a data mesh, fabric, all the topics that many of you think about quite often. So, with that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we hope you'll take a moment to listen to the second version as well. Hello. Thanks everybody for joining today's Data Legends podcast, Stories from the IT Trenches. My name is Courtney Pilata. We are here today with guest Wes Gelpi, Director of Research and Development at the SAS Corporation. And we are going to explore a variety of topics, as we often do on our podcast, talking a little bit about Wes's experience, what he's really seeing when he thinks about and evaluates interesting and new technology considerations, how he focuses on leading teams in today's climate, and answers a variety of questions. So, Wes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't we kick off with the most basic question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What your journey has looked like as an IT leader, and what you're doing today?
Certainly. So I started out my career I'd say my entire career, I have been in the data and analytics and engineering space. So I started out largely in the HR analytics space. I didn't really know I was going to get in there. Actually, I kind of raised my hand out of the blue for a position, and ended up that I was hooked after that. So spent a lot of time in the retail industry sector first, and worked on basic reporting, supporting compensation, but also analysis about salary range penetration across the United States for all of our stores. So that was a lot of fun. And then after that, I got the opportunity to move on to Red Hat, where I built out their first of its kind people analytics function. And so there I spent a lot of time working with reporting analytics related to HR. I also spent standing up their first data science function inside HR. So working on projects like trying to predict turnover, if you will, or why people leave, that sort of stuff. And also focused a lot on visualization. We also did a lot of, at that point in time, data, custom build data engineering, and partnered closely with IT at that time on building a new for Red Hat, a new data visualization and data virtualization technology, which was a lot of fun. And then in my current role at SAS, I am the director of R&D, where my focus and responsibility has now shifted to Kubernetes development and software engineering. So I have responsibility for teams that are responsible for observability, traceability, job orchestration, and compute workload management inside primarily the Kubernetes space, but all enabling compute workloads for SAS.
Well, I'm sure that is no small feat, at least certainly in your present role, given how quickly so many organizations are moving to Kubernetes style workloads and running very data intense applications in a cloud environment. So I'm sure it creates an opportunity for a lot of innovation.
It does, and it's exciting, both exciting and challenging for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I guess I was thinking about your Red Hat experience and this work you were doing on kind of like the people ops side, and like understanding why how do you predict people staying and going? And I don't know, in today's environment with so much change on teams, and we'll talk a little bit about that during the podcast today, technology like that is, I'm sure, very, very useful.
It absolutely is useful. And it also can be, I think, and we're maybe alluding to further along, but it can be challenging, and data can be tricky. So
yeah, right. Like any data set, you go, what should I do based on what I'm seeing here?
yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about the teams of people you work with, even in your present role, or whichever examples you think are most pertinent. But um, as you think about leading teams, and leading teams specifically of engineers, of passionate IT professionals, what are the sorts of things or approaches that you've deployed to really create a successful and collaborative environment that drives meaningful outcomes?
So when I was thinking about this, there are two things that really came to mind rather quickly for me. The first is freedom for creativity. At the end of the day, engineers are creating something. They're creating code, and it's not necessarily something that just comes, naturally. Sometimes, I mean, we've all heard of writer's block. So we really have to be able to enable that same level of creativity for engineers. Um, and one of the things that I've also found is that it's creativity or innovation is not something that you can just say, okay, go innovate. You have to be, there has to be some level of freedom for the mind to wander, if you will, and kind of think about a problem creatively. And so for me, what I like to do is hold or drive innovation days or hackathons, or whatever you want to call it. And these are times that basically there is very little to no criteria. The only criteria that I have ever held is you have to demo something to me at the end of the day. And so I kind of give my team that basic task of give me something at the end of the day. I don't care if you failed at it. I don't care if you succeeded. If it's a far reach, just demo something to me. And then I get out of the way, and then I let them go off and do their thing, which is really cool to observe the energy and the excitement that I've seen there. And then the second thing is really a connectivity to customer impact. I think we tend to think of engineers as maybe they're reclusive or they just like to code, and some of that is true. But at the same time, engineers, they like to see their stuff impact customers, and so they really like. I mean, that's really important to them. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be creating things because they want to see people using it. So really tying whatever they are doing back to customer impact. If it is, if the engineer's up for it, actually getting them on a customer call where they're asking a question, or at the very least, getting to have a more strategic presentation from a product manager, something like that. But we really need to connect engineers to customers because they tend to seek it out.
Yeah, no, I mean, both are really interesting points, which is this like creating space, your first point about creating space to just do what you like to do, but not with the boundaries of whatever project an individual may be working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that sometimes you see some really creative things that might spur ideas about what you're doing in your day-to-day environment. And maybe you don't, but there's so much to be gained by giving somebody a blank slate. I think the hardest part, certainly if I think about it on my own team, is making space for that. How do you
Yes.
make time to let those things happen? But I mean, based on your description, you see something like that and you go, oh, there's a lot of power in making it happen. It's worth
Mm-hmm.
the time.
Absolutely. There is a lot of power, and there's also, I would argue, a lot of return on that investment. If you give engineers the ability to just say, I'm going to often try this, and they may come back and realize, we could have just spent 3 or 4 sprints on something that I quickly realized, let's go a different direction. Or conversely, we didn't have the time, so I never would have gone down this path because it seemed too risky. And now that I've gone down this path, I realize, oh, we could be rather innovative here. So it's really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like the way that you use the term creative because
Mm.
creative means different things to different people. I mean, I'm a marketer. People think we are creative. I argue I'm probably not that creative, but there's creativity in every type of role. It just needs to be sort of tapped. And sometimes it's not about the volume of the work. It's about the
Right.
quality of the work. And how can you find
Absolutely.
ways to really that's what people bring to the table, right? Like we all
Right.
think differently. And you say, oh, how would you solve this? I never thought that.
Yeah.
It creates a completely different environment.
You mentioned a good point there. Actually, I think one important thing is that these hackathons are teams of sorts. And I've had smaller teams, so it's been the whole team responsible, or we've even gone so far, so even a team of 6 will break into 3 teams. But I think it's important to have people have the opportunity to not only ask the question of themselves, but also ask the question of somebody else and see how they respond to it.
Yeah. And maybe work with people that you're not working with that closely every day. It's just
Yes.
like kind of like
Yes.
that is we're doing something like that at Chaos Search at the moment, where you're spending a little bit of time working with people who are not necessarily even on your team. And I've not had my first meeting of this sort yet, but I look forward to it, because you're like, who knows what ideas you're going to come up with? It's a totally different lens.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
have you noticed that in the way that you lead teams today, that in this more distributed work environment, and the sort of desire people have to be more hybrid, that that these same sorts of tactics that you're talking about work well?
They can. Talking about the hackathons or innovation days, I mean, that is something that can be done in a remote, fashion, and can be successful, and I has been successful for me. And then I think, the other thing is that as leaders, we really just need to kind of trust our engineers and get out of their way. I mean, I think for me, I realized that I could sit there and ask an engineer every day, "Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet?" But really, at the end of the day, I'm distracting from that creative process. And so for me, I view my goal in all that is to um, lay down the, "Hey, here's where we want to go," and then get out of the way and keep preparing for it. "Here's where we want to go" question and conversation, and let them do it. So to me, I do think people can continue to be motivated. I think it's we have to be a little bit more conscious of the fact that some people are isolated, and maybe not everybody enjoys being isolated. So it requires maybe more frequent opportunities for people to engage with you, and giving people the opportunity to, you know, set up calls with you on a more frequent basis, maybe than a more, than a larger time.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and
that's
maybe
kind of
even
where I
some
think
of
we
that
need to go.
one-on-one time too, like the time for those conversations to happen, where they're just two individuals and not the group, to
Yes.
really kind of dive into how are things going, how is the project going, like is there any way, not like as you described, not are you done, but
Right.
tell me more about how this is going for you.
Tell me
So
more. Be curious. And then where possible, when it comes to this, I mean, I have been fortunate enough I have been able to bring most of my team together for an outdoor picnic. So still recognizing that people do appreciate that social nature, and so having a good mixture of, I respect and I trust you as an engineer to do what you need to do, but if you want, having this other avenue for people to kind of start branching back out again, and seeing colleagues again that they haven't seen in a while.
yeah, it brings back kind of like a different type of energy. It's great
It does.
when it can happen. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. We have an office space in Boston, and I think the team has found a lot of opportunities to kind of get together outside the office and reconnect, and
Mm.
it's maybe more appreciated than it ever was, I guess we'll
Yeah.
say.
Absolutely.
So changing topics a little bit. I imagine in this R&D role, you're constantly looking at and evaluating different types of technology that you may use to solve problems, technology that you may be thinking about building. But what sort of maybe processes or considerations do you take into account when you're like thinking about new technology, and what kind of technology is exciting to you today? Like you talked about this, your career is
Mhm.
extensive in data analytics, and what today is like, oh, I can't wait to see this play itself out because it'll be really powerful.
Yeah. Um, I still think Kubernetes has a long way to go, and really can be, it still can be a game changer. I was listening to a different podcast. I don't even remember what it was called, but they were talking about, they're going over different surveys related to Kubernetes. And I am paraphrasing, but basically the amount of actual true adoption of Kubernetes today is still rather low, which means that the benefits of Kubernetes still hasn't been realized by the vast majority of companies. So to me, that is really exciting, because the way that it can be leveraged to really drive stronger resiliency within your platforms and applications. It can help teams be more innovative by giving them their safe space to do work, and then hooking up with the rest of the group when it's appropriate. So to me, Kubernetes is something that's a game changer. Ironically enough, I'm pretty sure Google has been using it since like the early 2000s, but we'll
But we still have a
we'll
long way
give
to
them a
go.
pass, and I think we still have a long way to go, and it is exciting. Uh,
That's good. It probably creates a series of, I guess, constant learning, but then obviously opportunity for continued innovation. So
yes,
that's,
absolutely.
yeah, no, that's awesome. And
Uh,
then what about, let's talk about people in their roles. So uh, let's think about data engineers. So I'll give the example that at Chaos Search, we talk to a lot of data engineers. We help people solve logs problems, log analytics
mhm.
problems. And as a result, you have individuals who are really focused on helping solve that within their organization. But I think there's still a lot of gray area around like, what is the role of a data engineer on today's analytics team? And then, like, if they are, not to lead you, like an unsung hero of sorts, why is that? Like, why is it that way?
Um, well, I think to answer the first part of your question, data engineers are an area that is, in my opinion, pretty underinvested when it comes to resources. I have seen firsthand a extremely intelligent and capable data scientist um, flop when it came to trying to understand and pull together data the way that he needed to have it done. And it was through no fault of his own that his goal and his frame of mind is to analyze and understand trends in data and try to drive predictions off of data. His frame of mind is not in figuring out if this should be a character field versus a number field, and which can store both. So, like, to me, the data scientist has a key partner in data engineers. I was trying to think of an analogy here, and to me, it's like I don't think we would expect a pastry chef to prepare a 7-course meal. He or she may be able to do it, but we would expect a different specialist to be able to prepare the appetizers and the entrees, and the pastry chef to focus on the desserts. And so it's similar with working with data. The data engineer really needs to be a key part to all this. I have seen data scientists that struggle with basic SQL statements. Again, it's not a knock on them, but their focus is on developing learning algorithms and working with data in a different way. So I really think we need to be able to focus on data engineers as a key resource.
I appreciate your perspective on that partnership. And I guess to ask one other question on that, if you think about a team of analytics professionals, you have data scientists, you have data engineers. Like, what would you envision those? Like, sometimes you talk about teams working in triangles, where sort of like everybody plays a part to
Mhm.
deliver the outcome. Because you're right, not every data scientist is going to be a master of SQL. Not
Mhm.
every data engineer is going to be thinking about building an ML algorithm. But what are the combinations of skill sets that you think are pretty critical to answer the analytics questions that teams are having today?
Mhm. So it's definitely a combination, and the data engineer has to understand a little bit about the data scientist's world, and vice versa. And the data analyst also has a key component in this. So to me, the data analyst also has to be able to understand a little bit about what the data scientist is trying to do, and maybe he or she also dabbles in data engineering. In terms of core skills, obviously they have to have some knowledge on coding, and I would say it's varied. But Python is obviously very popular in the data science world, as is R and SQL as well. And then there is a pretty big art to visualizing content appropriately. You can tell very different stories depending on how you just put data on a chart. If you choose to and if you choose to use a bar chart versus a line chart versus an area graph, all those can. And so the visualization component is something that I think a lot of people can tend to underestimate as well. And then to me, performance is another skill set that all areas need to really be able to take into account. I think the data engineer brings the most to the table here. Um, I've seen a data engineer take a query that, I mean, admittedly I had ran, who I'm not a data engineer, but I had built, that took an hour to run, and he took it down to running in a matter of seconds. And so again, speaking back to the value of data engineers, and then there has to be that, to your point, the triangle where each pillar has to be in collaboration with the other. And they have to be able to see the other's point of view, but also understand how they bring value to the table equally in those three different parts.
Yeah, no, and the visualization piece is it's so true, right? Like, what is the narrative
Mm-hmm.
that is that all of this data is now helping evolve?
Yes.
And depending on how that's presented, somebody's consumption of the primary point can be completely different from what was intended.
Yes.
So that combination of the engineer, we see this, the sort of like a performance engineer, also a data scientist and an analyst. It makes a lot of sense that those are sort of specialties that are pretty critical and not the same in terms
Absolutely.
of being able to answer questions.
In my ideal world, every analytics team would be comprised of a data engineer, data scientist, a data analyst, and a graphic artist, a graphic designer. Because sometimes it doesn't, you shouldn't be thinking about it from a data perspective. You should be thinking from a psychological, how do we present and tell the story? And it's easy for data people to get just lost on the numbers. But sometimes the graphic artist really can bring that to light in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, also very true on a marketing team.
Yeah.
The number of things that go out there's so few that don't touch a graphic designer, whether it's in our world, it's an infographic, it's they're metrics that we're presenting. There's so much opportunity to present something so that people consume it simply.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's pretty.
And it requires thought.
It
requires thought.
Yeah, it requires thought. It requires like the ability to like really discern what the primary points are and say, what do I actually want to say here? As opposed to, what if I say it all? Will somebody get it?
Yeah.
Which can sometimes happen. But no, well, I mean, Wes, that's great perspective. And it sounds like, it's very interesting perspective you bring to this podcast, because we have not spoken with a lot of guests who have spent a tremendous amount of time with cloud services. Like you talk about your experience with Kubernetes, with data scientists very specifically. And I hopefully that's very helpful for our listeners to just gain Absolutely. A little perspective into what those modern engineering teams really look like and how they work well. And then I guess changing the topic again, like outside of what you do all day. Okay. So like we'll call it our most fun topic of the day. What sort of activities are you excited or passionate about? Do you go with blank slates and build things? What are you excited about in your non-SaaS work time?
Yeah. So I'm always trying, I'm always getting into something, and sometimes it's to the chagrin of my wife, but I got to keep busy somehow. And so as if 2 kids and dogs and a family wasn't enough. So I am on the board for a local charity, JDRF, which is focused on improving the lives and curing the type 1 diabetes. So that's a very fun part, and I enjoy giving back in that way and helping out. In fact, we have the local fundraiser gala this weekend, so I'm super excited about that. And then I'm also going to be riding 100 miles, hopefully, if all goes well, in Amelia Island, Florida, later on to support that cause. And then it should be fun.
Both things are great. You did say you were going to have a busy weekend, and now we know that a fundraiser's annual event is certainly a busy thing.
That'll be part of it.
And the 100-mile bike ride is no small feat. I think for any of our listeners out there who have done any sort of endurance sport, we can appreciate that is not easy.
Yeah.
And Amelia Island is probably not going to be chilly, so you better be.
Hopefully, it is in December, so hopefully the weather is rather nice. But it has been known to be in the high 90s there, and so it's been.
Yeah, so you get to plan for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, those are awesome things. I mean, the difference of perspective that we've been able to sort of to gain from each of our speakers is pretty awesome, because everybody has things that they think about and work on in their spare time, and sometimes your professional life helps make those things happen too. The skill sets align a little bit, but
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Wes, we appreciate you taking the time. This is a great session. I don't know if nothing else to share, I would say I really appreciate your perspective. I think that, you had some very tangible feedback around what people could do to try to inspire and motivate teams to be creative and think differently, and not just for engineering teams, for any team.
Yeah.
And certainly it sounds like you guys are doing some really interesting things when it comes to harnessing the power of Kubernetes, which we'll call as an untapped resource. And for folks that want to connect with Wes, he's available. He's on LinkedIn. And with that, we'll conclude today's session. So thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.